Good evening. It's nice to see everyone. So first thing, we can call the meeting to order because we have the quorum. And then the next one is the approval of agenda. Who would want to move to that? All in favor? And seconded by Trustee Benjamin. Trustee Benjamin. So then we have acknowledgement of traditional territory.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe-Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Okay, so the next one is declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none, we move on to the approval of minutes. And are there any questions or comments about that? Who would somebody want to approve or move for the wow? And seconded by, no. Sorry, I can't see your name.
It's Anju. Yeah.
Anju. And then we have chair's request for written questions from committee members. I don't have any, and Shelley is not here. So we move on to notices of motion and petitions. None. Then public questions, delegations. Then it is report from officials and staff and NGAT? NGAT. And yeah, by Mr.
George
Soltanitis.
So before George gets started, I just want to deliver a little bit of context to this fantastic report that you're going to hear about. So we're excited to share that we have now completed the pilot study of the Naglieri Gifted Assessment Tool. That's the NGAT that we are referring to. And so the NGAT was administered in a pilot form earlier this school year in response to ministry directives related to disproportionalities in special education. In particular, we were taking a look at the underrepresentation of Black, Indigenous students, English language learners, and girls in our gifted programs in Peel. So again, the ministry review and our board data indicated that those groups were underrepresented in our gifted programs. We also have a mandate to look at overrepresentation, and that work is ongoing. There's not a pilot program associated with that work, but it is ongoing in a variety of forms, including de-streaming, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in this meeting, and other projects around supporting secondary de-streaming, projects around student review process, which was launched at this time last year, actually earlier last year. We did some professional learning around it, and that particular protocol and policy was rewritten actually before COVID. So that work of addressing the overrepresentation of certain groups in special education classes is ongoing, but the NGAT was focusing specifically on underrepresentation in gifted. The information that you're going to hear this evening is very preliminary. So while the pilot is completed, it's happened, the data is still being collected. There's some exciting data that we look forward to sharing with you this evening, but we are still compiling, we are still aligning with our partners in research and innovation to bring even more information about the impact of this pilot project. So it's not a full report. A full report is coming, and you will receive that full report before the end of this school year. So with that said, I'd like to invite our coordinating principal with responsibility for gifted, George Sultanitis, to share the information with us. And he's also accompanied by Richard Lyle, our SERT, our special education resource teacher with responsibility for gifted. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Superintendent Newby, and through you, Madam Co-Chair. Thanks for introducing. I am new to the role, and I do know there are several new faces here, so I will provide a little more context of the NGAT. So the review of the Gifted Identification Process Report was submitted to Special Education Advisory Committee on April 22nd, 2021. In the report, a pilot study was recommended to trial some of the suggested measures and to examine their impact on better addressing issues of inequity and disproportionality. So these suggestions included the use of the NGAT, which stands for the Naglieri General Abilities Test, discontinuing the use of the Gifted Rating Scale, the GRS, as a screening tool, and the use of parent-guardian input questionnaires and teacher feedback tools. So those were some of the recommendations. So a little bit about the NGAT itself. The NGAT was developed by Naglieri, Rulis, and Lansdowne in 2021 and published by Multi Health Systems Incorporated, MHS. 3 separate tests that measure general abilities using verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative content. The NGAT is designed with the goal of identifying gifted students in a more equitable manner. Test items are designed to remove cultural influences, allowing students to solve problems regardless of their first language and measure what students think versus what they know. So as part of the pilot preparation, consultation with the community stakeholders happened in June 2022. I wasn't part of the team at that point, but I was told that there was consultation. 21 pilot schools with approximately 1,000 grade 4 students took part of the pilot. Pilot schools were selected to include student representation based on racial identities, ELL status, gender, SVI, and geographic distribution. Parents and guardians of students at the NGAT pilot schools were provided with confidential self-identification survey to gather demographic data around student identity. So now I'm going to pass it over to Richard Lyle to continue with the report.
Yes, thank you. And for you, Madam Co-Chair, there's also a professional learning session was provided to the staff at all of the pilot schools who administered the NGAT. We had 50 staff members from those schools attend a professional learning session along with a number of our special education resource teachers. That happened last October 2022. To support the technology demands of the NGAT administration, 500 Chromebooks are distributed to the pilot schools. So the NGAT is entirely an online-based test. It's not paper. And post-administration, the research office distributed a staff input survey just to gather input and feedback around the NGAT preparation and administration process. So some of the preliminary data that we want to share around the NGAT is what we found. And when I say we, the central team, the research office, all of us who were working to support the implementation of this pilot, we compared the data from the NGAT to the Canadian Cognitive Abilities Test, which is what we have been using as a screening tool year over year. And what we found is that if we compare both tests and look at the 96th percentile, the CCAT has fewer students, only 2% of the students that meet that threshold compared to the NGAT, and that's 5% for the NGAT, and that's specifically in the verbal test, which we found was the best subtest to measure these outcomes for both tests. Female students fared better on both the verbal and the nonverbal NGAT tests compared to the CCAT, and they performed about the same in both the quantitative CCAT and NGAT tests. English language learners, specifically those at step 1 or step 2, were more likely to reach the 96th percentile with the NGAT. And the NGAT does show improvement over the CCAT for students who experience very high socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And the NGAT shows potential for improved outcomes for African, Black, and Afro-Caribbean identifying students as well. From the staff feedback survey that we collected, most teachers, by quite a lot actually, when I say most, who participated in the pilot told us that they preferred the NGAT to the CCAT in terms of student experience, time spent on preparation, and the overall experience. So based on the results of our NGAT pilot, we're proceeding with some further actions and next steps as we kind of move forward with this pilot process. So we've shared 2 groups of students with the pilot schools that we're recommending that they take further action with. We call them Group A and Group B. And these 2 groups are based on, again, looking at the data from these pilot schools. And I should say the pilot schools did both the NGAT and the CCAT, so that we were able to have that comparative data. So the Group A students are those on the NGAT that scored at or above the 96th percentile in the verbal tests. For those students, the school is to schedule a student review meeting. We are providing them with a teacher input questionnaire and a parent guardian input questionnaire that they are to then provide, gather more data and information, and then those students are to be referred to an identification, placement, and review committee for identification as exceptional intellectual gifted. Group B, those are the students that scored between the 93rd and the 95th percentile in that verbal subtest. Much the same like Group A, the schools to schedule a student review meeting. They're to have the classroom teacher complete the teacher input questionnaire. They're to gather the parent guardian input questionnaire data with the family. Those students can be programmed with non-identified special education supports in the in-school enhanced learning program. And the school, one of the recommendations from that student review meeting could be that the student is considered for further assessment with our psychology team. Finally, some of our next steps when we're looking at where we go from here with this pilot, we need to consider how, in consultation with our PDSB psychology staff and consultants, how the student review process and other board processes can mitigate the underrepresentation of English language learners, female identifying students, and Black and Indigenous students in our gifted programs. We also, so one of our next steps is considering an extended pilot of the NGAT in subsequent years, just drawing on a larger sample size, gathering more data, looking at that larger impact. And then we also want to continue the consultation with all of the appropriate stakeholders to gather that input, gather that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, really.
Trustee Clark.
Yeah, just a point of clarification here. I believe the pilot, just to confirm, the pilot program reached around 1,000 students, right? And 50 staff were trained to work this out? Yeah, okay.
Yes, there's 21 schools.
21 schools.
With about 1,000 students, but it's 946, I think was the exact number. And of the 21 schools, they sent 50 staff to this training.
Yeah.
So we said that anybody who's going to be administrating the NGAT at your school, typically a grade 4 teacher or a special education teacher or both, they're welcome to attend that training. Okay.
Great. Now, as somebody who has ADHD, I am extremely jealous of the future students who will benefit from this. So thank you.
Trustee Benjamin.
Oh, okay, through you, Chair, I just have a question. So these students, they were identified by the teachers, who were on the pilot project from the 21 schools. So how do you identify whether they are gifted or for the pilot project?
So that process is based on the NGAT data. So all grade 4 students were offered the opportunity to participate in the NGAT.
Okay.
A parent guardian information letter about the pilot process was sent out prior to the administration. And if parents and guardians consented participation than they participated. So it was offered to all of the students in grade 4 at those schools.
Okay, thank you.
Jessie?
You mentioned that the pilot is going to extend for a couple of years after, like you're going to have a sample size for the next few years. So when are we thinking about, it clearly sounds like the NGAT is more favorable to a number of community children or families. Are we thinking that we're going to implement this in the board in the next coming years? Or is this like there's like a roadmap or?
I think at this point, one of our considerations is that because the sample size, we chose 1,000 because that's approximately 10% of our current grade 4 students. And the representation of all the various groups that we were looking for was a comparative sample. But one of our considerations is that based on the data we have, we're very happy. But what we're considering is it beneficial to make a decision now based on this data, or is it better to go slow to go fast, to gather more data, to have a better understanding of the larger efficacy of the NGAT compared to the CCAT.
I do appreciate that you're testing the thinking and not the memorizing, because my kids are doing memorizing.
Any other questions?
So you said that the students were, parents were given the opportunity to opt out of doing this test. So when you bring more data forward, will it give us the numbers of students who opted out of doing the test?
Yes, so we actually have 2 pieces of data in that. Everyone who was offered participation was, so we would know, I think we have the actual numbers again in that future report, but by a very large extent, most students participated in that. And then we also have the identity survey data, which was provided to parents and guardians as well. And so there's some parents and guardians who didn't participate in that. So there's that 2 sets of participation. But if a parent or guardian did not provide the identity data, the student was still able to participate in the pilot.
Okay, and are there students who chose not to do the NGAT and also not to do the CCAT?
I wouldn't have the specifics around that. We'd have to go through and look through all of those things, but it is entirely possible that a student chose, or a parent or guardian chose not to do one, but do the other.
And we could bring that back to research as well. That's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Khan?
Yeah, should we put that into, a motion to get the information, or how does that work?
So, and that's a great question, thank you for it. And in my preamble, I said that this was just sort of a preliminary message, and there is a fulsome report, like we'll provide visuals, and then you'll get that report as well in your package prior to the meeting. That will have more of the stats, more of the information, and everything that we still have yet to receive from research. But we didn't want to wait until we have it all, because it's great that people are raising good questions now that can be potentially included. So that's why your feedback and the questions that you're asking and the things that you're thinking about is so helpful now, because if there's an opportunity to work it into the final report that we'll present later this year, then we'll certainly look to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Benjamin?
Yeah, in my ward, we have a lot of students who have been enrolled now. Since I think I'm a second-term trustee. In the first year, I know that we had refugees from Syria. We have now refugees from Afghanistan. Now we have refugees from Ukraine, and you did mention it's English-speaking students who are being tested. But there will be many students among these groups who were also gifted. So how do we identify these gifted students and provide some kind of services to them too? So it's just to add it to one of your questions, to me.
That is absolutely an excellent question, and that was actually one of our specific goals with this pilot. The NGAT, the way it's administered is it's entirely language free. So there's no written language, whereas with the CCAT, it is very reliant on English language proficiency. The NGAT is specifically designed to have these measures without the use of the English language. So it is entirely language independent.
Oh,
so that is one of the fantastic things about the tool, is that English language learners who would have previously not been offered the opportunity to do the CCAT because of that English language proficiency. They did participate, they are able to participate in this, and we have very good outcomes so far based on our data that shows that proportionally they were meeting our thresholds.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So, who will move further to stage of this report? Bob, and second, like, just so then we have Superintendent Newby's report.
Thank you so much. So, as you're aware, April is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, and I want to take a moment to speak about that change because it is a proposed change. Typically, it's been known as Autism Awareness Month, and so many supporters of people who identify as having autism, people with a diagnosis of autism, are feeling that they want to go beyond awareness. They want to go beyond raising awareness because awareness is getting to a certain point of saying, we understand that students have autism, but they want to move towards acceptance. And so we're moving towards a change in our language as well and referring to it whenever possible as Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. Because students want to be not only aware in terms of knowing that they're there, but feeling part of the program, feeling included, feeling accepted within the larger society. So that's change, and we're happy to talk about Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month for April. World Autism Day as well. So it's not just something that we are acknowledging in Peel or in Canada, but World Autism Day as well is taking place. Here in Peel, we have 101 contained class programs in elementary for students with an autism diagnosis. Approximately half of these classes serve students with additional diagnoses, such as developmental disabilities. At the start of this year, our 19 ASD itinerant teachers, both in elementary and secondary, were supporting just over 2,100 students in mainstream settings. And I think that that is a very important number to see. It speaks to pathways, it speaks to student voice and parent voice and choice as well. So students with an autism diagnosis, in consultation with schools and with their families, are determining where they want to spend their time, whether they want to be in mainstream programs or whether they want to be in our autism programs specifically. So I think that's really, really good news to hear. And the support continues in mainstream settings. So it's important to note that too, that when students are moving out of a class setting, they're still being supported within the mainstream. To celebrate the month, the atrium here at CBO will be filled with art by students. So specifically on the evening of April 26th, that's during a board meeting that's taking place, Aiden Lee, who describes himself as an abstract painter, teacher, and human advocate born with autism, ADHD, and anxiety, will be sharing some of that artwork here. There's also a potential consideration for a musical selection, but I'm told that that hasn't yet been confirmed, so stay tuned for more information about that. But it's great to see, again, our students showcasing their talent, their strength, their interests here at CBO in celebration of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. I'd also like to share that in support of student voice and choice in pathways and our commitment to de-streaming as a system, the Special Education Department has done extensive work with the Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment Department to develop messaging and professional learning about providing modifications for students in secondary school programs. Central to this message is the duty to accommodate, as outlined in the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Accommodation is personal, as each student's needs are unique and must be considered and reflected in the student's individual education plan, in the student's IEP. The board's duty to accommodate the student is reflected in the IEP and may include accommodations that impact instruction, the environment, the assessment practices. It also may include modifications that reduce the number and/or complexity of the expectations stated in the Ontario curriculum at the student's grade level. And it may also include alternative programs. Examples of alternative programs include speech remediation, social skills programs, orientation and mobility training, and personal care programs. The duty to accommodate is all-encompassing and must be provided on an individual basis in both elementary and secondary school panels, irrespective of pathway or placement. Professional learning will be provided in late spring to student success teachers in secondary, guidance counselors, special education heads, and administrators will be provided with the information and are, of course, always invited to attend as well. In considering modifications, parent voice is essential, and through the student review process, students and parents are invited to engage with appropriate school staff to share post-secondary goals, interests, and determine the way forward to access the desired outcomes. More information on secondary modifications will be provided next month. And speaking of next month, I want to give some advanced notice. Each year, Ontarians mark the first full week of May as Mental Health Week. The Peel District School Board Mental Health Month Committee is pleased to highlight a range of events and activities throughout May for student, staff, and caregivers to promote mental health as a positive concept, something we all have, and learn more about staying well, increase awareness of the signs of mental health problems, decrease stigma, and understand that help is available and it works. I'd like to share that our very own Barb Sear and Fauzia Reza are representatives. They are representing SEAC on this committee. And please do connect with them, as I was in touch with the Mental Health Committee, and they are still seeking input. So in terms of if it's okay with Barb and Fauzia, we've asked that people perhaps get in touch with you. You can also reach out to me as well if you have suggestions around activities for Mental Health Week and Mental Health Month in terms of that kind of feedback. And that concludes my report for today.
Thank you. Any questions? So I have a question. Kids, this is the autism month. So there are kids, they have this diagnosis of autism, and then as they go to grade 7 or so, then they get another additional intellectual disability, developmentally delayed, and then they go into that setup. So how much focus stays on their primary diagnosis, which is autism? I've often wondered.
Thank you very much for that question. I think that, again, it has to do with the student's profile. And so it's all about what's presenting in the moment and what's presenting at this time. So if things have developed over time, then that might actually be the area of focus for teachers and for instruction. That might be the area of need in that moment. So the autism diagnosis, of course, will remain. That's not necessarily changing. But if it's being layered on with another possible exceptionality, developmental disability is the example that you just gave, there may need to be significant changes now to how that student's program is delivered in order to accommodate for the fact that there is new information.
Also, generally it's high school when mostly we see signs of mental health. So let's say there are some signs of mental health. What kind of support or guidance is provided by people like the psychologists, or is there a plan for it or something?
Thank you again for that question. We do need to talk more about mental health resources within the board. There are several resources. I think the ones that people think of most often, the ones that come to mind typically are social workers and psychologists. But we also have mental health clinicians that are available. We have the Be Well support line that's also available. So the social emotional learning side of the special education department, it's a very large department now because we have one side of it, I think of it as sides, but we work as a unit, dedicated to special education supports and one side dedicated to social emotional learning. It is on that side that we have a lot of our mental health supports, including CYCs, child and youth counselors. As I said, I mentioned the mental health clinicians, the Be Well support line. Of course, social workers do support, as well as psychologists. There are social workers and psychologists that are working through on the social emotional learning side. So I'm happy to bring forward some more information about supports available because as I participated in the community consultation, that was raised, that how are we communicating the supports that are available? We do put it on the website, but not everybody is necessarily going to the website to see what the supports are. So we're thinking about new ways to communicate that information, and certainly it would be beneficial for SEAC to have that information and continue to push that out as well for our own information and as well to share. So we could certainly bring that information back at a future meeting. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what would be the qualification of the mental health clinician, for example?
So can I talk about that specifically at the meeting? That way I can bring in, because some of the things to think about, in addition to your training, your experience that you're getting into these roles, another focus, and this is in line with the focus of Peel District School Board at this time, is identity-specific staff. And so staff who are bringing a diversity of experiences, a diversity of background, because it is in that oftentimes students are able to relate. So we do have caring adults. I mean, you mentioned secondary, certainly, and we have caring adults at all of our schools. But sometimes if a student is expressing the fact that they have a particular sexual orientation, they want to speak with someone who has some lived experience in that regard. If a student is dealing with mental health issues related to immigration and their experiences being new to Canada, they may want someone who, again, has similar experience with whom they can speak. So that's a specific area that we are focusing on in addition to the standard qualifications. And I think that they need to be weighted and honored equally. That lived experience and that identity piece is incredibly important. And we've heard that directly from students as well, participating in those feedback sessions, that they do want to see identity specific and interact with people that they feel can relate to what they are experiencing, what they are sharing.
Oh, thank you so much. Any other questions? Trustee Mitchell. After this, we can go to that.
Since you spoke about student mental wellness, so the student mental wellness does not start when they leave school. They're at home. It's night. Throughout the day, it's 24/7. So I was speaking to somebody. In fact, I got a congratulatory letter after I got re-elected from Every Mind, which is an NGO working in the Peel region, and it deals with mental wellness issues of children from 0 to 25. I was told that it was from 0 to 18, but because of COVID, they have not increased it to 25, and they have a 24/7, helpline. So, so you could include this, and I think they're already working with the field board. So here you have another community resource that, our students and families, especially even parents, and we have a lot of immigrant families. We have not a lot of new immigrants who are coming from different parts of the world. They have to deal not only with the problem of settling in a new country, but all the issues that come post-COVID. So I think this is an area the PDSB needs to focus. And as you mentioned, specific staff need to be assigned to provide those specific roles for our kids. And there's a lot of other related issues which come up because of mental health.
Jessie?
Not a question, but more of maybe a question. But I know a while back we used to have like a school resource or SROs or school resource officers. Is there like a thought to have something like that for mental health and awareness and acceptance where they can kind of rover around? Because I can imagine that it might be difficult to have experienced staff that have lived in the situation at all of these schools supporting all of these teachers. But has there been any thought to having these mental health advocates or resources kind of rover around so that it's a community that they can touch base before school, after school, during school?
Thank you so much for that question. I think that the idea of staff accessibility in terms of being available in the schools is certainly something that we want to see whenever possible. What that looks like is still under development, I think, at this time. We do have staff, as I mentioned, the clinicians and other staff who are going into schools on a regular basis and interacting with students. But having somebody sort of posted at each school, is that what you're describing?
Yeah, or even just shared resources where like, I'm like, okay, someone can identify as South Asian women, like South Asian women, and I'm like, okay, like our family situations are similar and I want to reach out to them and I know that this is an SRO or special mental health officer that I can connect with. And like, I don't know, maybe like putting on a road, I'm just thinking, and I'm solutioning and I'm not, that's not what I'm trying to do, but I'm just talking out loud. That's kind of like in my head that it would be great as a student to say, hey, I know I can connect with Jassy and she, you know, comes to our school from 3 to 5 and she has lived in experiences like I do, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not trying to solution, I'm just trying to, you know, kind of wrap my head around what type of resources might be available. This mental health week and the advocacy and the representation, that's for outreach to the students, but there's also going to be training or some sort of communication with the staff too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you started to say something about a roadshow, and that did happen. That was a practice at one point, just in terms of getting information. You're nodding your head to your member as well. Yeah, so it was a practice in terms of getting information out to schools. So again, the communication piece, I think we can have a more in-depth conversation where we can talk about staff qualifications, community partnerships, how we are sharing the fact that we have identity-specific staff. Because to your point, how would you know, right, as a student, until somebody comes around and shares that with you, or until you have an opportunity to perhaps meet, or until those messages are sent out. We do have fulsome information coming forward with regards through the mental health committee as well as through the social emotional learning department. So again, this is sort of a preliminary piece. I'm glad I mentioned it in my report to kind of get our minds on and thinking about this, but this in a more fulsome way is going to come forward, and it'll be great to have some consultation pieces as well, hear more about what it is you'd like to see.
Any other questions? Okay, so Jessie, would you receive this report? And second, who will second it? Trustee Clark. So the next one is communications. Are we just supposed to receive it? So it's some information in the agenda as well at this time. So that's it. So I just asked different people to receive it. Okay. So 9.1 free ADHD resource now available. Who would want to receive? Okay. All together. We can do them together. Yeah. All of them. So Canada. And so who will second? I'll second. Okay. Just do it. So now it is reports from representatives and council associations. Any reports? So I just have to tell that Autism Ontario, please visit its website, is offering scholarships for students who are applying for university. So just visit their website, or I'll send you the link via email. It's just in my cell phone right now. And then it is 10.1 and 10.2. It is OPVIC Association report.
Yeah, that's just some information for resources, and then the school in Brentford for children that are visually impaired. I think, like, I've personally seen it at Huntington Ridge, but I just thought I'd share it, so it's just so that we can, I'm not really sure what the formal process is, it's not my second time, but wanted to share the report that the resources are available for children with visual impairment.
Huntington Ridge.
Yeah.
And these are both from you, Jessie.
Yeah, they're both from me, yeah.
And
there's a library resource, so there's an online library that children can access for large print. You know, for the children that don't actually have like a Zoom in kind of laptop, but there's a large print online library community that they can access, and they can get like Braille, CD audio, large print books, that type of educational material. And then the other one was around the school for visual impairment. But I mean, if anyone knows of a parent that has questions around that, feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, great. It's an elementary school, right?
Yeah, I think it actually goes up to high school. Yeah. Yeah. And they have like weekend programs and summer programs. The facilities, I haven't toured it myself with my son, but I heard that it's phenomenal. So if you know of any parents that have children with visual impairment, you can send them my way. I'm happy to help.
Oh, thank you. So then we have questions asked of and by committee members. Carol.
I do apologize in advance here. I do have two questions that did get missed from the last meeting. And I do have new ones here. I didn't get a chance to send off an email. The first one has to do with the school board projects to prevent and remove accessibility barriers. The Ministry of Education funded school board projects to prevent and remove accessibility barriers experienced by students with special education needs and or disabilities. School boards were invited to apply and 37 projects were selected. And that list is actually in our package. And with the descriptions of all 37 projects. The question is why Peel was not part of that list, and is there a reason why we weren't able to put in a report or a request for that? That's the first question.
Thank you for that question. So earlier this year and throughout the year, and I think towards the end of last year, we had spoken about the Peel Accessibility Committee. So there's a committee that is dedicated to moving forward the goals of accessibility within the board. Accessibility is everyone's responsibility. When it comes to submitting specific projects, applications for grants, it's typically done through the Accessibility Committee first, because there's a determination that it aligns with some of the board priorities and the work that we want to do. And then through the Accessibility Committee, then we table and put forth the applications. In this past year, the Accessibility Committee was not formed. It has recently formed over the past 2 months. I think I mentioned it in the last CAC committee. So we now have representatives. We now have a committee formed, and it's a working group to address these issues. And certainly going forward, I see no reason why going forward, Peel wouldn't be putting something forward in that regard. So thank you for raising that. And I'll also make a note of that and bring it back to the Accessibility Committee because I'm on it, along with our local Accessibility Committee rep. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. On that note, I did send an email saying that I would be interested, but I just didn't know who else to actually put in, so. Okay. The second question is for the de-streaming. The implementation of de-streamed grade 9 courses in math and English poses challenges. When will the committee next get an update on how the supports put in place are working for the students with special education needs? And are there any changes needed to the policies for evaluating student progress, assigning grades, and granting credits?
Again, thank you for that question, and that's why I think it was helpful to plan to have some information around modifications coming to CAC going forward. We really need time to get the data. You need time to implement, and then the good example was what we shared earlier around NGAT, right? So you have some immediate data, sort of short-term data, that you can have right away when you make a change or implement a process. And then you have data that you need to get over the long term. So for example, we would need to give it some time before we could see if there was an impact on graduation rates. Before that's going to take some time to get that data. So as the data becomes available, I think it makes more sense to do these updates piece by piece, sort of like, again, what we did with NGAT. We give you the preliminary information. This is what we're seeing. As we get more information, we will return and provide the data as it becomes available. So that's the plan with regards to DD streaming. We are working with curriculum and instruction to continue to work through this process, because some pieces are just now being provided. So for example, as I said earlier in the report, when it comes to modifications in secondary, staff are going to be provided with additional training. So we're not going to be able to see the outcome of the additional training until after they've actually had an opportunity to have it, right? So we're going to need to give updates on a regular basis. So we'll be hearing again from George and some members on his team with regards to that. And certainly I'm open to inviting some members from the curriculum department as well, who are also holding responsibility for this work. It doesn't just rest with special education, because obviously de-streaming is about programming in mainstream classes. And I see that Paul is going to weigh in on this as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Through you, Chair. I would also offer that annually we're responsible for an equity accountability report card that's delivered to the board. And in that fulsome report that takes months upon months of our research department to do, lots of the information that I think we all would be interested in would be buried in that report. So I would suggest that leveraging that report as opposed to double tapping that department to redo or recreate some of that data that probably already exists in that equity report card. So perhaps unpacking and mining that accountability report card for some of the information that we're seeking is probably a good first step.
Okay, thank you. Just an side note for that, LDAO, which is the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario, is actually collecting feedback received from parents and students on the experiences with the streams classes also too. I do have two more questions left. The first one has to do with technology, which is the chat GPT, and what are the plans for the board and how it is affecting our students within special education at this point.
So I'm not aware of any plans around ChatGPT, but I'm going to turn it over to somebody who may have some awareness around that, and that is Catherine at the back. She's waving to jump in here.
Hi, thank you. There was actually a question about that at the Governance and Policy Committee, and there will be a report coming back to that committee on ChatGPT and other similar type technologies that are becoming more available, and talking about that in relation to any policies and procedures that we may need, particularly regarding plagiarism and how we're going to be approaching that from a student perspective. And we'd be happy to, once that's gone through that committee, happy to share it with Jennifer for any particular, Superintendent Newby, sorry, any particular attention on special education needs as well.
Great, thank you. And the last question has to do with the CEAC brochures. I know maybe 2 or 3 months ago we were talking about that, and in fact there was funding for it. Just wanted to know if there was any further movement on the update on it.
Thank you for the question. One of the considerations, and I discussed this with Chair Foster, and recognize that she's not with us this evening, but I think she'd be okay with me sharing that we've been in conversation around it. It's essentially completed. One of the things that we were waiting for were 2 conversations or 2 decisions. One decision was the filling of the final seat for CEAC, and then the brochure would be complete, because we have a complete CEAC, all of the members, we put out the brochure, as opposed to putting in a brochure that's missing some key information, which is the most recent addition. I think that to honor people who are coming forward and wanting to join the CEAC committee, it made sense to hold off on doing the brochure until we had all the information and then send it out. So we were waiting for that. And then the other is one of the staff-led consultation items that's on the agenda, and that is the members at large for CEAC. So it's a conversation. So once we've determined whether or not that's something to explore, then we can move forward with certainty around the agenda. But the content, like the base of the information, it is all there, it's all prepared. Those were the two pieces that we were waiting on, and then we would put it out. And then once it's out, I don't think it would need regular updating because this would be the committee for some time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so we move on to 12.1. Parent of concerned protocols, Ms. Sarah Simon.
And so just as I did with George, just a 30 seconds worth of context setting. So when we spoke about this earlier this year, we talked about having some information available about how parents can get their questions answered, their problems sort of resolved in a manner that is efficient, in a manner that is, I guess, transparent, is because we continue to hear that feedback that people don't necessarily know where to go or how. We do often say, please start with the school, and that is the number one area. But sometimes there are roadblocks where people, for whatever reason, can't seem to get to where they need to be in their communication with the school. So we want to make sure that we are transparent and we're providing some thoughtful suggestions about how parents can interact with the board and address their concerns. It's not a protocol for clarity. We gave some consideration about whether or not it would be a protocol or whether it would be a guideline or whether it be, I just think, I like to think it's suggestions around managing parent concerns. I think that's a better way of putting it, right? Let's not make it like, I don't want it to be bound up in sort of the protocol language necessarily. There's absolutely a place for this, but really this is intended to be something that we want to do to help and to support parents. So we're fortunate to have coordinating principal Sarah Salman to speak with us, and it is a consultation process. So looking for your input, what's missing, what else can we add, what else do you want to know? So that's the purpose of this area 12 of the agenda, which we were fortunate to be able to add this year so that we can really get some feedback as opposed to after it's done and then we hear about things that perhaps we didn't think about. So as many voices as we can will be beneficial. So thank you so much, Sarah. I turn it over to you.
And through you, Madam Co-Chair. Can we go to slide 2, please? So really our guiding principles as a board are around the acronym of CARE. And we want, as any work that we do as a board, as different departments, we want to ensure that we're creating transformative systems and we're prioritizing individual needs. At the same time, we want to affirm values and respect the inherent dignity of all members of our communities, students, parents, educators. We want to recognize the salience of race, indigeneity, settler colonialism, white supremacy, racism, intersecting forms of oppression. So in all our interactions, we want to make sure that that's at our forefront and we understand the interactions we're having with one another from a very critical lens at the same time. We want to educate ourselves around historical truths and contemporary realities. We want to secure accountability, develop critical consciousness, and take action. So those are our guiding principles that we have as a board. And looking at those guiding principles, we all, I wanted to refer us back to the board website. So if we go to slide 3. If when concerns do come up and parents have questions, the first go-to place really should be, I have questions, Peel District School website, About Us, and on About Us, we have a complaint protocol. So that is for the whole system. If you go to slide number 4, in our special education department and from the Ministry of Education, we really embed the importance of shared solutions. with families, educators, and all involved in the care of our students. So really, we're working from that framework that's provided by the Ministry of Education. If we can go to slide number 4, as Superintendent Newby earlier referred to, was the launch of the student review process. And we really want to embed that student review process in our how we approach problem solving. At the center, we want to make sure that the school, family, and student are always a priority, and that's where the relationship exists, and that's where we would like to maintain that relationship to problem solve, to make sure it's solved within community through reflective practices that serve the students' learning. That is always our focus. If I could direct us to slide number 6, please. So when we're navigating concerns with community or around student learning, some of our guiding to the CEAC committee would be to, what is it the parent really has concerns about? How can we help them navigate and prioritize, identify their concerns, help them gather information, and then direct them back to the school. So that is where the problem is, and that's where the relationship is, and that's where we would like to engage in problem solving. Now, thinking back to that student review process, we also want to encourage parents to go back to the school, request a meeting, request a student review meeting with the school so that we can come up with some shared solutions to some of the concerns. So help parents, please narrow down what is the problem, what is it that they would like to address, and make a list, guide them on the questions to ask, but always go back to the school first. If I could guide us to the next slide. So the first would be the teacher at the school level, because that's the relationship that impacts the student the most. And we want to maintain the integrity of that relationship so that when another issue comes up, we have the relationship between home and school intact and a solution more readily available. If that's not possible, the next point of contact should always be the school principal. Any concern related to school policy, program, unresolved issues with staff around student programming, and that well-being and success. That goes with the school principal. And finally, the superintendent, the last resource of that family of schools, because we want to ensure, again, the integrity of the relationship between home and school. We want the child, the parent, and the teacher to be able to move forward and do that in a way that's collaborative. If I can move us to the next slide. So what are some next steps? Once a parent has reached out to the school, be supportive, check in, allow for a reasonable amount of time for the teacher, the principal, or the superintendent to respond, and follow up with the parent directly. And the next slide, please, slide number 10. So some possible steps the school may take when it comes to resolving some concerns around the student is directly engage with, the teacher may directly want to engage with the family, come up, maybe that's coming into the student review meeting and saying, okay, so let's discuss it, let's come up with some school-based solutions first. They may consult within their school special education staff to problem solve. They may talk to central special education resource staff to gain access to resources or some thing that they might not know more about and do some learning and then bring it back. But it's always towards working to a solution. if the problem is escalated to the school principal, if I can move this along, Mark, thank you. We wanted to center around engaging parents in the school. The principal may direct the parent back to the classroom teacher or facilitate a meeting between the classroom teacher and the parents so that there is a third party who's genuinely advocating for that student. So we, again, always at the center of conversation is the student needs and how do we problem solve and what can we do. The principal may, if that's not a viable solution, may reach out to central board staff to say, hey, do you have something that could help us move this forward? Are there other resources? Are there other considerations? And if the problem is still not solved, the principal may consult with the superintendent themselves to come up with some kind of a plan. And finally, the superintendent. It's almost like a clock, like a wheel, right? We work as a system together. And the superintendent may collect information and try to understand where the disconnect is. Where is it that we need to go back to and problem solve? They may reach out, ask for some time to reach back out to the school, problem solve with the principal. The principal may not even be aware that there is a problem if you've already escalated to the principal, and the principal may engage the classroom teacher. Yet again, we want to work in partnership as a team and come up with a solution that best serves the need of that student in our school. Thank you.
Thank you. Very valuable information, and I think I need to really spend time looking at the website of Peelschools. Do not have done it for some time. So, any questions? Yes, Christina.
Sorry. Okay, the graphics and presentation, I didn't see them in the package that we got. Is it possible to get that? Okay, because yeah, visual learning here. Unless you can describe it using quantum physics math, I need the visual aid.
Yes, apologies. That was, it was to be included. It was just, we just missed the deadline for inclusion because we try to get the package out all together and not have other pieces sent. So we'll send that.
Okay, and my next question is, well, quite pertinent, as I have two families that are having some issues right now. How do we handle when the parent is, doesn't feel like they're getting any results? When we go, no matter, how hard I mean, there are some issues where things aren't working and or it seems like it's not working properly and the superintendent's doing all that they can. What are the next steps that we can offer the parent? That's maybe we should be asking the legal committee for this one.
You know what, I think that's a great question, and this is why we're engaging in this conversation, because we want to invite this. I want to hear from trustees, I want to hear from everyone in terms of, what you're facing, what you're experiencing, and what more we could possibly add. But the situation that you are thinking of is the situations are very specific situations that center around that family. And so sometimes what a parent may be frustrated about may have changed from the beginning situation to where we are now. So, right, so there might have been a solution to the first part, but now we're on part B and we're looking, right? So things can change over the course of that problem solving, solution finding. I mean, I like that graphic with the arrow, because what it suggests to me is it is a journey. And so you start the journey, you're not necessarily there tomorrow, right? And I 100% understand the frustration that goes with time, because we're talking about children, and they have 1 year usually in grade 1, in grade 9, and whatever it is, they just have that year. So you don't feel like you can take a long time to solve the problem, but it is a journey. We're working towards a solution. So I think what we would advise everyone to do, and I think Syra touched on it, is to continue to listen and to continue to make sure that the parents are feeling heard at every stage of the process. Because again, without knowing the specifics, and we wouldn't get into that, but without knowing the specifics of what it is that's frustrating at the moment, I think in my experience, there's nothing more frustrating than when parents feel that the people have given up and are no longer listening, right? So that constant listening, no matter what the issue is, even if it's changed, even if it's the same issue from start to finish, constantly being there to hear that, I think is really, really key. Paul, you're looking like you might want to add something there. I know, because you really did, you look like that.
Sure, thank you, through your chair. It's a complex situation, and every situation is nuanced and has different circumstances around all things. I would say generally for this presentation, I think one of the things that is important is, although we think we don't have time, it's important to give a little breathing space. You know, if you've coached sports or done anything, you know, that 24-hour rule, I think is really important. It gives an opportunity for us to really think about what's going on as a parent. I've got 3 kids myself. I know I've gone through this many times. Giving them an opportunity to breathe, think about, you know, how I'm interpreting, how they interpreted the interaction, and so on and so forth. So I think one of the pieces is, you know, oftentimes we get frustrated is when the parent goes directly to the director. I mean, those things, they cut off relationships and they quickly escalate, and then we're trying to peel it back from there. But to your point, when, you know, there are times it's going to get to me when I was a field SO or an AD, I get those pieces because, you know, they're not getting the responses they require, and sometimes families just want to hear it from the source that they want to hear it from. So, and that's okay. Sometimes that's going to happen. We're not saying, and I don't think the protocol is ever saying, and I really appreciate the fact that, you know, superintendents were included in there. Sometimes it has to go there in order for those things to have some peace and some resolution, but that's very seldom do they get there. And I think as trustees or as family members, I think the source is always going to be really, that solution is going to be with the student in the face of the classroom teacher. That resolution should, or that conversation, 90% of the time needs to happen in order for some success to be felt by the student. But again, there is a process that we move forward, and sometimes, you know, the 2% of things is going to get to the superintendent, the associate director, legal, whatever the resources are available.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bob and then Mr.
I noticed in there it says to wait a reasonable amount of time. What's a reasonable amount of time? You know, to a parent, a couple days. To a principal, it might be 5 months.
Yeah.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll look into that.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would like to thank Sarah for the wonderful presentation. And this is not an issue only for parents with students with special needs, but this is an issue throughout the board. We have to have some kind of a protocol and some kind of information that is given out to parents who bring in their kids from kindergarten, and then parents who come in, you know, in different stages of the school system. Like you have your new immigrants, you have the work permit people, you have the refugee family, you have everything. So they, at the entry point, need to be given some kind of information showing them the protocol. Because I had a parent, March break, was it 8th March? That was the last day of school.
Yeah.
Sent me an email. I got your email from you. Left out, by the way, the trustees. We had the last point.
Yeah.
But I got your email from the board website. I said, what's the issue? I put in my child in grade 3. We want the busing. And then promptly after the March break, get the email, no response from the principal.
Yeah.
So, you know, the whole issue, the whole protocol, that information is missing to that. So where do they go first? Maybe they go to the We Welcome the World centers, or do they come to the board? So at every entry point, when a new student is being, admitted to the board, this information package should be given. If there is an issue, you have if it's in the classroom, teacher, principal, superintendent, and then you come to us. So I said, we are the last point where you come, we are the last resort. You go to the principal and definitely. And promptly when school reopened after the March break, I said, these are operational matters, it goes to the principal. Principal responded, Mr. So-and-so, called him and said, your child is already in the bus this morning. So that kind of a gap is existing, not only for, it should be given to all students, all parents. So we are trying to bring this issue up again and again at the board meetings. And Trustee Clark, a new trustee, has to be given that kind of training, that information, because we are just learning on the job school. So there's a lot of gaps there, and this information should be provided at the point of entry. Not at the schools, not at the board level, at the We Welcome the World centers, all information. So parents know where do they have to go, and they're not, left saying, we have no information, we are lost. And some of the parents are also not very comfortable navigating the board website. Mm-hmm. There is so much information available there. Where do we go? And then we say, every school has its website. There is information, but even there, they may not be savvy in navigating the website. So there needs to be maybe in family of schools or in north and south areas, you need to have parents meetings once, at least at the beginning of the year, the school year. Give them some kind of general information so they are comfortable and they know, okay, there is somebody whom to go to, whom to approach. So hopefully we will be putting together some kind of a information package for parents. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe something like that would not go amiss as standard issue for like parent-teacher meetings, or parent-teacher night, when they come to us with students. The teacher has like, here we go, and related to the new students. Sometimes when it's happened a couple of times for me, when a new principal comes on board, there's a loss of continuity with couple, not all of them, but there's always seems to be a, once in a while, one issue gets forgotten. So do we have, specific plans for how that is, for how the new teacher is, I hesitate to use the corporate lingo, onboarded with the new, their new responsibilities? Thank you. Okay.
Jessie, did you want to comment on it?
If I may respond to that?
Sure.
So usually when there is a transition between administrators, principals, we usually go through a transition planning meeting. So maybe that is something where we could look at the protocols or guidelines. Also, I'm wondering if you think this is something that could be shared at school council meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right, so that there is some kind of information sharing, but again, we're here to listen and get recommendations.
I thank you for sharing that, and as well when you were speaking and talking about how to know. One thing that I did see in my previous experience was a poster that was in every school building that outlined exactly these steps. It said, if you're concerned, speak with your teacher. And then if that isn't resolved, speak with the principal. And it actually had, because it was for each school. So speak with the teacher, speak with the principal, and there was a space to put in that person's name and information. And then if you're still not concerned, and then it had the superintendent and the trustee kind of on the same line. So it said superintendent first, but be aware, this is your trustee.
Yeah.
And we got fantastic feedback on that. It wasn't special education specific, it was just a board-wide communication strategy to help people to understand who it is that they need to call. Because you're absolutely right, I've heard that again and again, that not everybody, and we have the information on the website, and it's important that we do. It's very important that we do, but not everybody is going to a website. And in the moment, it's nice to be able to say, oh, there it is right there, that's the person's name, and that's who I need to speak with. So I think there's a variety of different strategies that could possibly work to get this information out, and again, really valuing all the feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna second all the feedback. I think my first thing is really around the timing and what is, but I think I saw you jotting down notes because from a personal experience, my son waited almost 2 years to get a vision itinerant. Like the vision itinerant that was supposed to service him said that he didn't qualify, and I was patient for 2 years. And I understand it's COVID, and then I was talking with the parents around the field, and all of our kids, they don't fit in that cookie cutter mold, and your community is as strong as the communication and the sharing and back and forth, and we're all setting each other up for success, right? But if the parents feel like it's on them, but then they're putting the administration out, or they're gonna, for fear of being labeled as a difficult parent, they wait years or they wait months. And like you said, your child is only in grade 1 for 1 year, and then you wait 2-3 years, and then you've missed the boat on that, and your child could be getting the resources, and now they're delayed because their education fell back. So I think timing is something that parents need to have some sort of guideline, like, hey, wait. And I'm not saying, because obviously there's a ton of stuff happening in the school boards and then in the schools, but I think there has to be some sort of guideline set out to the parents that is fair and reasonable, so that they can kind of adhere to that. And then the website, we're, Peel in all of these communities, there's, tons of immigrant families, and they don't know how to navigate. Like, I talked to the parents on Huntington Ridge, and they don't know how to go through the website. So I'll often, I have WhatsApp groups, I'm like, oh, you need information, here you go. But I think it's great to have easily accessible resources for them to say, hey, your child, the doctor's identified as autistic, hey, X, Y, and Z would help you and have that support. And I think parents look to the board for that guidance, and they don't know where else to go. Like, other than the doctor, it's the board, right? So they look to the board for that guidance and community. But if they feel like they're constantly knocking on the door and an inconvenience, they'll shut down, and then eventually the child shuts down, and then you have problem communities, right?
Sorry, I'm just going to say that ditto to everyone, because that was my question, of what was the plan to roll out the protocols, but as we've all talked about it. But I guess another option would be to give like a one-page flyer to all of us, because I don't know about you, but I get questions all the time from parents. What do I do in this situation? Who do I talk to, and all that kind of stuff. So we do guide them on a daily basis, but it'd be nice to have like a one-pager that we could provide to our communities as well.
So if I can just ask a follow-up to that, so you want to give me an idea of what you would want to see in that one pager? Because if I think about a one pager, I may think, this is what you guys need. And you're looking at it afterwards saying, oh, this is not what I was looking for at all. So what sort of things would you want to see in that one page guideline document that would help you?
Well, it's just that one slide with the arrows of the teacher to the principal to the superintendent, that just one pager with that information in terms of this is your first step. This is who you go to. If you can't get that resolved, then you go to the principal and like follow the process sort of thing. But yeah.
Okay, so it's not just for you, it's something that you would want to be able to get. Okay.
Yeah, to give out to our families, yeah.
Thank you, that is great.
That's
great suggestion.
Time, we're on like beginning of the school year, report card, I don't know, just a friendly reminder, half a page. And I know you don't want to cut down trees, and we're all in a virtual kind of, digital space and time, but I think the communities that we live in, they need something to stick onto the fridge to remind them.
Trustee Singh?
Thank you. Thank you, through your chair. I have experienced that parents were unhappy, teacher, principal, superintendent, resolutions. They think they elected someone who maybe can help them. So they will go to trustee. So I think it would just help parents if we add in that protocol, when they can go to trustee, they can or they cannot. So I think it'll help the parents. Otherwise, the after superintendent, they're confused why we elected a trustee if we cannot go up to them.
Just add that along with that, I think it would help to have the roles or accountabilities.
And
Like
also
your
the time.
principal's role is this, A, B, C. And if it's outside of this role, you wait your turn, your 4 days, 5 days, whatever. And if it's D, E, F, go to the superintendent. And if it's X, Y, Z, you're gonna go to your trustee. Because I think the lack of understanding is the roles and maybe even having them in different languages.
Yeah, and I was also gonna say, maybe even also having a spot where it talks about how to reach out to the teacher, because sometimes the intent for a parent is just to send out a really quick email, and sometimes the intent of that email gets delivered really inappropriately, like, oh, it's really harsh or whatever, but to request that parent meeting, that's the first step. Request a parent meeting with the teacher, and then you go through.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Are we good? So, Trustee Singh, would you move for the receipt of this report?
Sure.
And Anju, would you second it? Okay. And now.
Is it coming back to?
Now we have members at large for SEAC and Superintendent Newby. Sorry?
Is this protocol coming back to us at some point?
This is what
It's a draft, right?
So leave it back.
So to clarify, and again, I know that protocol was written and it's even in the minutes as protocol, but I do want to clarify that it's not going to take the form of a protocol. Instead, it's going to take the form of basically what you saw on the slides, right? So again, the suggestions, everything that you're sharing, right? So this is the feedback that we wanted. How and where it will live, there's a number of options as we're talking about, right? So for example, people have said, well, this should be everywhere that there's an entry point, right? So is this something that we're now going to create that might become a part of the kindergarten registration package, which already has a lot of welcome information, but if there's a one page or something, would it become part of that? We Welcome the World already has in multiple languages welcoming information. So we're continuing to think about how best to share this information. Again, I'm hearing over and over again, it can't just live on websites. People want to have something. So does this become a section of the SEAC brochure? Now that we have, what I mean? Since it's not out yet, we may have time to put a little section on the back of the SEAC brochure saying, please be, mindful of, this role, that role, those types of things. So I think that's yet for exploration. And I think in terms of is it coming back, I think that we would want to come back and share whatever it is that we have either created or whatever it is that we're putting forth. Because again, it already exists on the website, the board. This is a SEAC conversation a little bit, but the board already has this information. What we're trying to do is refine it. We're trying to make it specific to supporting students with special education needs as well, because that's an extra level of complexity, right? Especially coming to trustees. So we wanted to make sure that we're looking at all the different avenues. So I think that we will revisit this. Can't say for sure when because of the time of year that we're in. So what could we be doing in terms of printing or whatever? I'm not sure what we could actually achieve. But I think we will return to this conversation. I think it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, and just if I could add, the word protocol is like, I love that word, but maybe it should be there, right? Something that, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to Superintendent Newby's report. Could you do both of them together?
So thank you for that. Actually, I was going to say that we will likely defer 12.3, which is the exclusion policy consultation. So again, defer just meaning that we will still do it, just we're not going to do it in this evening's meeting. We're going to defer that because again, we want to make sure that we're giving enough time to anything that we're talking about and then enough time to the discussion itself as well, right? So upon reflection, looking at where we are now, I'm hoping to move to defer that. And I'm going to speak now just then about the members at large for SEAC and have a bit of a discussion with the group around that. So as we know, we are in the process of filling the one remaining vacancy for a committee representative for SIAC. But in terms of the practices of the board, there are member-at-large positions as well. If the SIAC determines that they want that, if they determine that there should be, if there's a need for it. And the reason that I just wanted to have a brief consultation around that, because it's not my decision at all, but I wanted to have a bit of a transparent discussion around that. If there is an interest in having that, there would need to be a separate call out. So I'm clarifying that the call out that we just did was specifically for organizations, not for individuals. However, a member at large could be an individual. They don't have to necessarily represent an organization or an agency. So there are some considerations around, the size of SIAC, the need to have diversity in terms of representation. There are considerations around if you were to have members at large, what would be their role of responsibility? Because you would not want to get in a situation where you just have an individual who's just sort of bringing forth individual concerns, whereas everyone else is representing an area or an organization. So it's a piece to put out there, just seeking input from the group. There's no decisions to be made at all. If people are feeling like they would like to table this and if they're content with a 12-member SIAC and we're good, it's working for us, we're fine with that. We don't at this time see any need for extension, that's great. If there needs to be any kind of consideration, we would need to know ahead of time because the current call out cannot be applied to members at large. So that's what's being put to the table and just inviting question and comment. And
has this been brought up at other boards and other committees? Do you know if this has been added to the roster at all? Or is this something completely new and Peel is forthcoming and we're putting it out there?
No, it's not new. I can speak for my previous board. We did have those members at large positions occupied, but again, with very specific role in mind. And that was, I don't know, I can't tell you how long that was the case, but certainly all the time that I was there, those members at large positions were filled. So it's not unique to Peel. It's just a fact that we just happened to have a seat come up available and that raised sort of the conversation and raised the question. So in the spirit of, again, consultation, wanted to raise that. So it's not anything innovative and new. It's something that does exist in other boards. I can only speak for Toronto Board in terms of saying that they do have those seats filled.
Thank you.
Bob, then Jessie.
Just my opinion, I think that we really don't have a need to add extra members, including the trustees. There's 15 of us altogether. I think community members might be advantageous at a board where they have a hard time filling all their SIAC seats and they need some more input from other members, but we, as in the past, I've not seen us having any difficulty filling any of our SIAC seats. As long as I've been here, we've always had 12, and I think that this is the longest that we've gone without having 12. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, is there in this special education board office here, has there been a need that's identified that isn't represented around the table? Like there's autism, there's low vision, blind, sorry, I don't know how to say it. Yeah, sorry. But like, is there a need that we have that is, I don't know, emerging out of COVID or I don't know. I don't know, but like, is there a need that we haven't, and there might be a committee that we can reach out to that would better represent, that could better, I don't know, benefit from having a seat here? Because that what the call out was for before?
So I really appreciate what you're raising and the suggestion there. The call out was to fill a vacant seat, so I believe it was the Tourette's Association that vacated their seat and said we no longer will serve on the PLCAC at this time, so then we have the vacant seat. So that's how that came about. In terms of the representation on SEAC, it really is a function of community, I think. I think it's a function of community. What is it that the community needs? I wouldn't presume to speak for the community. I think that emerges. So we did have, as I said, applications for this vacant seat, and that process is underway. But if there's something that people think needs to be addressed, I think that, again, there's always opportunity to share that. And it's also important to know that just because a group doesn't have membership on SEAC doesn't mean that they don't have voice. And I think it's very, very important that we continue to message that. Although you may not have a seat, you still have a lot of people that you can reach out to, myself included, to bring forth concerns. Communication comes all the time through board email, things to say, would you share this? Would you find somebody for me to speak with about something? So the SEAC, although we have the committee and it's established, and to Barb's point, it's very consistent. I think that there's avenues for the community to still continue to outreach.
Just to go.
Okay, what is disposition of the organizations applying for this? Now, or if you are able to share any of that, like, are they from specific? Oh, okay, I didn't think so, I just thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Yeah, just out of respect for the applicants and respecting privacy, we wouldn't share any information about the applicants this time.
Yeah, good.
I'm assuming then that we would go through the motion and petitions to be able to put that through anyway, right? Even though we're having that conversation.
Great question. I'm wondering if there's anything that you wanted to comment on that. Right now, this is just a consultation. As I said, there's no decision being made. I'm just sort of feeling out whether or not further discussion would be needed. But if at some point there would be, would we be going through, somebody would have to put a motion forward, Catherine, I believe, and that would be the process. So it's not, like I said, no decisions being made here. It's just for information, because I did want people to understand the difference between the two and to recognize that it would require a separate call out and to see if there are any questions around that. So we would have to go through the appropriate process if that was a determination down the road.
Thank you. Any other comments? So 12.3 is deferred. The time for adjournment. I only have this. Great.
I do have one more question, sorry. Back at 9.5, the tutoring program status was oral.
Oh, yeah, I was wondering about that.
I'm sorry, we were just having a bit of a side conversation about the item that we were.
I'm sorry, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I had a question before adjourning, I apologize. At 9.5 was the tutoring program status, which was supposed to be oral. Are we going to defer that then?
Oh, my goodness.
9.5.
Yeah. Was that missed?
Yes.
Yeah, that was missed actually when I was going through it one by one. It was suggested that I should get a receipt for all of it together.
But I'm okay deferring it, but that's.
So sorry, that was a report.
That was a report. Karen,
Yeah,
was that you?
oral report.
Yeah.
Said it was oral.
Oh.
It's an oral report.
Apologies. I don't know that you wanted to do that orally. I think you received it in your package, right?
No, we didn't. We didn't receive anything in the package for that.
Yeah, the first four were.
Yeah, it was 9.4, and then there's 10.1.
Okay. Apologies, so I think that may have been the item that we weren't able to get into the package in time, so we will defer that.
Okay.
If that's the case, we'll defer that, because you don't have it in written form, and we're not doing it orally, so we'll definitely defer it, so thank you for that.
Thank you, and sorry about that. So, 13 is, oh gosh, my computer, it was on my cell phone again, so it is motion action log.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
So with regards to the motion action log, I'd like to just review once more the process by which we share information on the motion action log. So as it's determined that an item will be added to the motion action log, and that's determined through consultation between myself and the chair, following the SEAC meeting, based on information that was raised, questions, suggestions, we have a conversation about whether or not to add an additional item to the action motion log. Understanding that the action log is typically about something that the board is now going to take on, something that the board is now going to do. So there's a conversation, and it's determined that something will be added to the motion action log. And again, it's not an individual decision, it's a joint decision, and in many cases, a group discussion. The item is added with the meeting date where the item originated. The area, the agenda item, is highlighted so that people can track back and find it. The status. Then it's the actual question or follow-up challenge that needs to happen, and a description of that. And the section, and I'm wondering if it needs some sort of title or label or whatever, but the section below, in the interest of space and just clarity, is the section that is provided by Cecil to indicate what is happening with that item. So if we take a look at November 9th, 2022, Jennifer Knight submitted a question. Okay, and it's a question about the Standard and Development Committee's report recommendations. Okay, and the question is, when will there be some information follow-up from SEAC around that? When can there be sharing? So there will be follow-up by Cecil, so by this team, by this department, and that's tracking for June 2023. So that's the response. That's not going to come off the action motion log until after June 2023. So it's not sufficient just for the board to say we're going to do this, we're going to put it on there, and we'll have that there until this transpires. So that's why it's still on there. So in case there's a deferral, like we don't know what will happen, right? And so we're going to have it on there until that happens. The next example is some questions that were submitted. So the questions that could be actioned and have been actioned and responded to are removed. Remaining questions will remain until there's a response. So the response indicates what's going to happen. So like I said, follow up at a meeting, follow up SEAC presentation, whatever it is, that's indicated. If there's something that cannot be actioned, it will say NA, not actionable, is what NA stands for. It will appear that way on the following meeting so that everybody knows what that response was, if there needs to be an opportunity to discuss. And then it's removed from the action motion log. And again, that's just to keep the action motion log from ending up pages and pages, because if there's no action, if it's not actionable, there's no point in having it on there, for an extended period of time. So I did share that at the last meeting, but I think it always is beneficial to review. And I want to also invite, if anybody has any other items that they feel should be under consideration to be discussed about inclusion on the action motion.
But we had discussed the action motion log some time ago, almost a year ago, I think. And one of the items that we want to see on the action motion log is the answer to the question, not just answered. The actual answer to the question we would like to see in the action motion log.
So depending on what form the answer takes, because sometimes the answer cannot be captured in the action motion log. So example would be the presentation that we had this evening, right? So if people are asking questions, for example, about what happened with the NGAT pilot, how much, what was the data, what was the outcome, how many schools were involved, there was a lot of information there. And so we wouldn't put that necessarily in the action motion log. If it's part of a larger report and that report is being shared, then that's the information that we're putting in the action motion log. So depending on what the question is, usually we try to provide something more fulsome. If there's a document, like an actual report that I said is coming next month, I think, around NGAT, then that will be included. But to dialogue through the action motion log, every possible thing that could be shared, that's part of the reason why we wanted to do it in the meetings as well.
Yeah, I understand, but then the question would have been answered with the report. But if someone says, oh, what color is the carpeting gonna be? And you say, well, we'll get back to you and let you know, and then you put in the action motion log answered instead of the color that's gonna be blue.
Okay, so I think that's a good suggestion.
Not that we
about
care
being
what color the
no,
carpet
I understand, I appreciate that. So we can clarify again, where the answer is being provided. I think that's reasonable. So the answer, in some instances, the answer, I know that, after, because you're right, we spoke about this a year ago. And so sometimes the answer, for example, is part of the superintendent's report, right? And again, because I have 2 paragraphs, I have room and space to do 2 paragraphs for a fulsome answer here, which I don't necessarily think is appropriate to put here. So, follow up by Cecil, content in report, follow up by Cecil, content in SO report, follow up by Cecil. So being specific about where would I find the answer to that? That's what you're speaking about, being specific about not just answered, but being specific about where the answer was provided.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea, because one of the reasons we created the action motion log is, well, we ask questions and no one gets back to us.
Yeah.
But we ask the same questions over and over again, and it's like, well, I think I answered that last year. Well, where did you answer that question? Well, nobody remembers.
Thank you, that's very important, and I appreciate that. It serves as a bit of a record. I want to make a distinction though between the action motion log and the minutes, right? We also have minutes, and that's why on our agenda, in so many different areas on the agenda, we're asking for questions in so many different areas on the agenda, because that's another place where we can ask the question and then actually have a record of the answer that's given. So just to make a distinction, my understanding is one of the differences with the action motion log, which is why it leads with the word action, is because we're being asked to do something. Answering a question about what color, just to follow your example, answering a question about what color, that can maybe be answered straight away, right? And we would have it there and it would be captured in the minutes, right? So we could just answer that question versus preparing a report, doing additional research, preparing a presentation. So it's just a little bit of a distinction there about actions that we would want to have in the action motion log versus the questions asked by committee members and that sort of thing. So there's a couple of avenues, is my point.
Yes, so it would be a question that we ask that is not answered here at the meeting. But there are sometimes when we ask a question here at the meeting and there's no response, even though it was responded to during the meeting, the response doesn't appear in the minutes, or the response is in the minutes but not the actual question, and then years down the road we don't know what that answer was. What was the question that went with that answer, or what is the answer to that question that was asked, because only one is in the minutes, not both. I can bring in some really old agendas and show you. I'm just going back to 2006.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, this is, in any case, it's good information to have, because in terms of the detail, the minutes are not a full transcript. They're meant to capture the main ideas. Right. So that's good information for us to have. And again, this is the purpose of the conversation, right? To make sure that we're refining our practices and making sure that we're operating as effectively and efficiently as we possibly can. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
Trustee Clark, did you have a question? Jessie.
Yeah, if I could just ask, so the questions that we asked about when it came to the student review process or like the autism awareness or the mental health, will those questions then be in the action log or addressed in the meeting minutes? I'm just trying to understand when and where they would be addressed.
So I think that it depends on where in the agenda the question was asked, right? So we had some questions again asked in response to the presentation. We had some questions asked in response to the SO report. So if the response, and there's always a response, I think, even if the response is we don't yet know, right? There's always a response. So depending on what the response is, that will dictate where that question goes, right? It has to be responded to, I think, unless you're being told that you're not going to get a response. And we have to be transparent, right? So when Trustee Clark asked about, details about CI, you're not going to get an answer to that, so I'm going to tell you that, so you're not waiting, right? So it does depend to some degree about where the question is asked, right? But I think we endeavor in some form or another to provide a response and to have that captured in writing somewhere, because it is important from a historical point of view. People do want to look back, even if you missed the meeting, and you want to look back and see what the answer to the question is. So it's going to exist either in the action motion log, again, in consultation with the chair or the co-chair, or it's going to exist, again, it will be presented as part of a presentation where all of those questions can be addressed. The example would be the, as AD De Silva spoke about, some of those questions around the data concerning that he said we could get from the equity report, the annual equity report, those types of things, right? So you get a lot of rich information. So rather than providing a one-line response in an action motion log or 2 sentences in the SO report, that's a rich source of data. We can bring that forward, but it does take some time, so it may not come forward the very next meeting. So. But yeah, the tracking is important. We're going to have to know when that answer is going to come. So we try to say in June, in April, and that kind of thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, just to
Yeah, apologies. Just to clarify, I wasn't asking for specific names of organizations.
No, I understand.
I just wanted to have an idea of if we are capturing specific segments of the different communities, because there are so many communities that aren't getting heard. So that's just to be clear.
Thank you.
Oh, Karen.
Just one last thing. Instead of having that separate line saying follow up by, can you just add it underneath and just bold it? And just say action, follow up by Cecil by June 2023. Because I think for somebody who may not be part of the committee, may not understand what that actually means.
That's helpful. That's exactly the kind of feedback when we're having these conversations in this part of it. That's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. So that's helpful. Thank you. So action follow up by Cecil, or action follow up by this department, because it may not actually be this department. So right. Action follow up by whomever.
Okay. But within that section there.
Absolutely.
Versus separately.
Yes.
Any other comments? And so, Karen, would you move for the receipt of this? And would you please second? Thank you. And now we can adjourn, I guess. This time is the correct adjournment. Who will go for it? Trustee Singh, second.